I think that filmmakers in the future are going to have to take a page out of the musician's handbook and provide experiences for these people, for their audiences. And of course, films play a role in that. Like, they are filmmakers at the core, and they are kind of like the lightning rod that can kind of like billow out into other experiences that end up helping possibly fund their filmmaking, whether that be making culinary tours, or I've had success with what we call film to table events, where we basically show a few taste films, and then afterwards I have a local chef or a couple local chefs provide a menu inspired by the films that we had just watched, and we have a meal together.
That's super smart. Super smart. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of No Set Path. I'm your host, Drew English. If this is your first time joining us, welcome, and thanks so much for being here. It's been a minute since I released an episode of the show. I know I said I was going to be more consistent about it, and I really haven't been. If you really want to discuss it with me, you can email into the show. If not, let's just press forward with another great interview, shall we? Today's guest is Kevin Longa. Kevin kind of fell into my lap. A random listener of the show emailed in and said, hey, really love the show. I know this guy, Kevin. I think he would be a great fit. So I checked him out. Sure enough, he's a shoo-in for the guests we have here. Kevin's the creator of the international food documentary series entitled Taste. He's filmed with dictator-fighting restaurateurs in Myanmar, slow food snail farmers in Vienna, Jewish bakers who fight anti-Semitism in Budapest, native hunters in Borneo, culinary preservationists in Bhutan. The list goes on. He's been all over the world with this project. It's something that's deeply personal to him, that goes all the way back to childhood with some health problems that he had early on that forced him to get really intimate and close with the food that he consumed. And it's kind of fed the rest of his life and this project, as you'll find out. I had a great conversation with Kevin. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So without further delay, here is my interview with Kevin Longa. So where'd you grow up, and you know, what's kind of that quick backstory? Like, where'd you grow up? How'd you get into food, filmmaking? Like, just give us the quick 1-2 on that.
Sure. Well, so I grew up in the Bay Area, not exactly San Francisco, just a little south of it, on the peninsula, and kind of like halfway between San Francisco and Palo Alto. So
what town?
Burlingame.
Okay.
Yeah,
is that near like Redwood City or anything like that?
Yeah, it's
okay.
A little north of Redwood City.
Okay, yeah, I know the area a little bit. I've shot a few jobs out there, so.
Oh, cool. You've definitely traveled through Burlingame because it's right next to the airport.
Okay, yeah.
Little airport. And our motto, there's like on the side of the highway, there's like a billboard, and it says like, great place to shop, better place to live. That's like our motto.
Nice.
Some of my friends in high school used to call it boring game. And I don't know, that was kind of apropos in some ways. Like the highlight of our year was like a pet parade that would go up and down our main street. It was
nice.
Very suburbs, YSO soccer and everything like that. But how did I get into filmmaking and food and everything? Well, the very, very short, and I can go very detailed if you like, but I've been making films ever since I was 8 years old. And, growing up in the burbs, that was kind of like what me and my buddies would do. My friends and I were kind of like skaters, and so we made a bunch of skate videos. I made stop motion Lego movies, dramas, karate movies, music videos, sock puppet movies, you name it. I made hundreds and hundreds of short little films. I picked up my dad's high video camera and just went from there, and eventually graduated onto bigger and better cameras. And my family's not especially rich or anything, but I guess it was kind of convenient that we lived near the airport, because whenever we did spend, we would travel. And so I would take my dad's high-8 camera, and he was always, just like I'm just assuming, but like a lot of fathers are like the de facto like documenter of like birthdays and Christmases and things like that. And well, when we went and traveled abroad, or even in the United States, my dad would normally have a camera up glued to his eye. In fact, he was an optometrist. Both my parents were optometrists, and they're retired now. But so they taught me to use my eyes in certain ways. And I just really, I've always really loved movies. I've always just been infatuated and mesmerized by them, the storytelling. And how I got into food was I've always been kind of a bit of a misfit, and it started with me being a little overweight when I was a kid, and I wasn't eating the best of foods. Like my normal meal at McDonald's would be large fries, large Coke, a McFlurry, 2 cheeseburgers, and a McChicken.
It's substantial, you know.
Yeah. My grandparents, who lived like 30 minutes away from me, we went down to near Redwood City, where there's another town called Mountain View, and there's my favorite happy place, Krispy Kreme donuts.
Yeah.
And I would inhale a half a dozen of those little beauties in one sitting. And bear in mind, I'm like 8, 9, 10 years old. And so, just like a lot of young kids, I had quite a sweet tooth. And one thing led to another. And by the time I was 11 years old, I was in the doctor's office, and my nurse, she walked in carrying a clipboard. She looked down at the board. She looked at me. It was my body mass index chart. And she kind of gave me a piercing glare and said, "Kevin, if you keep this up, you're going to get type 2 diabetes." And I just froze, and I had this kind of like epiphany moment. It was kind of like a reverse Ratatouille moment when like the critic tastes the ratatouille at final climactic scene.
Yeah.
I had this out-of-body experience where I just pictured myself looking like Homer Simpson in a muumuu dress, giving myself insulin shots for the rest of my life. I was also a huge Simpsons fan.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, but that has to be like quite the revelation, obviously not in a positive light, but at such a young age to have someone kind of sit you down and say, like, this is what your future could look like if you don't, kind of change your habits. It seems like on the young side to me,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was, at the time, I felt like it was a bit of a curse, but it was quite the blessing, because it did change the trajectory of my life in many, many ways. Like, not only did like the day after that doctor's visit, I kind of like looked at myself in the mirror, and I grabbed onto my love handles, and I kind of wished that I could like remove it as easily as I could remove like a heavy camera strap from around my neck. And I just pretty much put myself through like a personal boot camp until like butter and sweat and Krispy Kreme grease was seeping out of my pores. And during that time, my middle school teacher, Mr. Green, assigned us to go see Super Size Me, the documentary where Morgan Spurlock, the filmmaker, subjects himself to 30 days of eating just McDonald's.
Yeah.
And that was quite a fateful moment, because then I realized, because bear in mind, I'm 11 years old. And before that, a lot of my movie diet was, Hollywood movies and things, narrative films. Of course, I watched a few documentaries, but it really wasn't part of my, my diet then, my media diet.
I think that makes perfect sense. That you're like, that's kind of the pivot age where you're starting to like consume different kinds of things, different media, and so on.
You're absolutely right, Drew. Yeah. And especially since, I lived in Suburbia, like I wasn't in the middle of, or an urban city where I see a whole bunch of different people from all walks of life and all the issues that might affect people at an earlier age. I was kind of insulated in some ways. And so, that movie just opened up my eyes, and I went cold turkey on fast food for the rest of my life. I was kind of in the A, B, and C like grade range in middle school. I was in this program called Avid, which is kind of like quote unquote the nearly there program. And so after kind of shaping up quite literally, and then also learning about documentary filmmaking, I started doing better with my grades. And also I started hitting up the local farms and farmers markets and restaurants with my camera, learning about my food through the best way I knew how, which was through my video camera. And so by the time I was in high school, I made my first feature-length food documentary.
So to fast forward a little bit, I mean, you continue, I'm assuming you just kind of continue from high school through like college, continuing to make films and continuing to have a passion for food. But in the little bit of research I was able to do, you didn't actually go to school for either culinary or for filmmaking, right?
You're right.
Yeah. What'd you go to school for?
So I went to UCLA and I got a degree in economics.
Okay.
And a minor in human complex systems. And I went to a lot of film school classes, but I don't have a degree from a film school. And in fact, part of the reason why I'm here in New York was I also attended some NYU film classes, but I didn't earn a degree from there either. And there's a lot I could say about that. I think, first of all, I had some doubts going in. Like, I applied to a bunch of schools. I did fairly well by the end of high school. And I was applying to a number of programs. And for example, I got into like Chapman's film school and I highly, highly considered going there. But I ended up thinking like, well, I'm only like 17, 18. I forgot exactly what age it is.
Yeah.
Graduate high school, but like you're basically kind of deciding what your vocation is when you don't really have that much life experience, right? And I think it's actually kind of ridiculous that you do that. And like I'm a bit of a black sheep in my family. A lot of my family is doctors, lawyers, teachers, accountants. I do have a passion for business. I mean, there is a reason why I'm filming food entrepreneurs. And not only that, but like I really loved producing. And in fact, the only school that I did not get accepted to was USC. And I actually applied specifically to their Peter Stark producing program. And I was dead set on going there. In fact, I cried when I got the rejection letter. And so I just took it as like a sign that, okay, I'm just going to go to UCLA. I'm going to go to the rival school and I'm just going to soak up the college experience for all it's worth. And I'm actually quite glad that I did the economics path. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of all the classes that I took, but it afforded me a lot more freedom. Like I was able to travel abroad for a whole year. I lived in Europe for a year. I was able to be part of the marching band and start several organizations, including a film organization with a few people. So, and it helped me think a little bit more indie entrepreneurially than if I went to film school.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I bring it up is, I went to music school, right? I have a bachelor's of music, which is absolutely worthless in every way, shape, and form. And, I've had kind of a bit of a roller coaster ride finding myself where I am now. And I just have had this phrase in my head lately where it's passion doesn't need to be profit, right? And I think that can relate to, and I totally agree with what you said earlier, that it's totally ridiculous that at 17 or 18 years old, it's like, the modern education system would suggest that exactly what your entire life path is going to be, and you should pick a major, and that's what it's going to be, And I think it's a really common tale, and not discounting, the experience you get from that and how that plays into your present self. I'm sure is really interesting. The other thing I'm interested in here is kind of the entrepreneurial side of things, because it's something that I discovered later in life. And so I'm always really fascinated when creative people can start to marry the like business side of things together. And you seem to be doing that really well with everything you're doing with taste. So maybe now's a good time to kind of get into your, I'm going to call it current project.
So Taste is an international short-form documentary series that feature undiscovered risk-takers who make food from around the world. So I filmed people like dictator fighting restaurateurs in Myanmar, Michelin-starred chefs in Europe, cricket farmers in Thailand, snail farmers in Vienna, Jewish bakers who fight anti-Semitism with their Hebrew-inspired cake designs in Budapest, hunters in Borneo, former felons who become fine dining chefs, the self-proclaimed food hooker of Copenhagen. The list goes on. I've been making this over the last 10 years, and I've filmed across 3 continents, about 70 short films. And I'm in post-production right now.
Where did you get the idea to start this?
So when I graduated college, nobody was hiring. And I was just getting a lot of rejections and everything. And as an economics major, I basically had 3 career paths that the Career Center wanted me to go down, which was consulting, investment banking, or accounting. And I don't know, I'd rather stick a number 2 pencil at my butt than do debits and credits for the rest of my life on a ledger. And so, in fact, I was a regular patron of my Career Center. I went there like 20 times. And like at one point, my career counselor kind of like put her hands up in the air and said like, all right, Kevin, I've kind of had enough of you trying to figure out what your job would be. If I gave you like a magic wand, what would it be? Like wave that wand, what would that career be? And you know, I was quite enamored with Anthony Bourdain and just how he opened up the world to not only food, but also people and their stories. And I'm a pretty curious guy. I like asking questions. And I see that you are also a person who likes to ask questions. And also just a little side note, like, even though you did learn music and you like as your baseline education, I actually think that's a wonderful foundational education for not just the arts, but also for life. Like I actually think everything is music. And what I mean by that is our heartbeats are music. How we communicate with one another is music. There's a musical phrase that's a question and then a response, right? And editing and filmmaking is music. Even when there is no music in a movie, it's music. Like a great example is Portrait of a Lady on Fire, a French movie. Mm-hmm. There's no soundtrack. There's 2 diegetic songs in the storyline, like Vivaldi's 4 Seasons, and then one song that's like sung by a choir of women around a fire. But the editing, like it takes place in a mansion, an old French mansion along the coastline, and there's like creaky floorboards and the turning of a knob, and that leads to tension. It leads to some kind of musicality, and especially, of course, also with documentaries, like you need to have that musicality of it. Like great documentaries a lot of times come down to access, like the access of who you can film with, the characters, the protagonists you're featuring, and editing. And music is huge to get like that emotional response from an audience.
I'm curious to know how many analogies people have drawn between you and what he was doing. It seems similar in some ways. Obviously, what you're doing with Taste is its own thing. I met Bourdain once in a very obscure way. I was working part-time in an Apple store, and I checked him into the family room in Grand Central Station. And that's about it. He's very, very tall man. Very tall man.
That's what I've heard. Well, you had one more encounter with Bourdain than I've ever had.
Okay.
Not to meet him, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But you know, his ability to open up the world. Like what I find so wonderful about filming people who make food is that food is just a skeleton key to so many different aspects of the world and of life. Because food, more than possibly any other substance, or I don't know what you want to call it, touches every fabric of our like. There's a phrase, of course, like money makes the world go round. I don't know, like food is nature. It's family, it's war, it's peace, it's social justice, it's the environment, it's literally our bodies, it's our mind, it's our health, it's celebration, it's sorrow, it's joy, it's all these things wrapped up into a tiny, delicious little package.
I mean, anybody listening will probably agree that it's when you go to a new place, what's one of the first things you do? You're like, where's the best place to eat? Where's the best place to grab a drink? Like, I want to experience this town. How do you go experience the town? You get out and you go to where people gather. Where are people gathering? They're gathering at restaurants, food trucks, bars, whatever, you name it. It's I definitely agree with that it is like entwined in the fabric of humanity, not just from a necessary like sustaining of life, but also from like a culture, like who we are, what makes us similar, what makes us different, that whole thing. It's really, really fascinating to me if you take the time to really dig into it. And I feel like this is not something we need to go down the rabbit hole on, but the very first series of Chef's Table, the first one, I think that first series, that first season was really exemplary at that, like really making you think about like food in different ways, and seeing people like cooking meat on open fire pits in the middle of like up on some like mountaintop. It's just like, it's a totally different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, David Gelb is the director of Chef's Table.
Yeah.
Another inspiration for me was Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which was his first feature documentary.
Yep. Totally.
And this is the No Set Path podcast. I've got to tell you, like, how this your original question was how this started, and it was quite a no set path story. So as I was saying, I didn't get a lot of bites when it came to applying for jobs. It was the tail end of the economic recession, and I got out of the blue a phone call from my buddy Brian. He started the Film and Photography Society back at UCLA, and I was a member of that for the time that I was in college. And he's amazing. Like he basically at the time wanted to become the next Michael Bay, and so we made big budget student films. And what do I mean by that? We had helicopters, SWAT teams, explosions. We had a chase scene in the LA River, like in Terminator 2. Like it was
just going for it. Going for it. Yeah.
We really played that UCLA or that student card hard. And we also what's nice about being at such a big school is that we have all those resources. Like we have our own SWAT team even that we could use. Which I don't think we would be able to access if I went to Chapman or something like that. And so he gave me a call, and he saw that I traveled quite a bit back in college when I was traveling, when I was studying abroad. And he asked me, "Hey, we just got invited to a big film festival in Asia. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "I don't know, man. I gotta find a job." And he said, "What is your job? What does he actually want to do?" And so for a week, I thought it over, got back on the phone. I said, "All right, I'll go with you, but on one condition. I want to take your camera, and I want to film something amazing." And the initial pitch, and I actually pitched this to like Travel Channel and the Malaysian Tourism Board and a few other places. Was the concept of it was going to be a TV show concept, how to live like James Bond on a budget.
Okay,
shaken not stirred.
Nice. I like it. I like it.
I mean, we both love James Bond, and in fact, that's part of the reason I got into movies in the first place. Was as a young like pre-adolescent kid, like James Bond was my jam. And so I initially started pitching that out, but I got no bites. And so I get to Asia, I get to Singapore, Malaysia, and I have a GoPro and a Canon 5D. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to start shooting. And what's amazing about Southeast Asia, which is where we mostly filmed around, or where we mostly traveled around, was food is abundant on the streets. People are cooking fresh ingredients and fresh foods right in front of you. Woks sparking and sizzling with rice and cilantro and mung beans and everything. And so what I would do often was I would film people making their foods. And then when I get the food, I would put down my camera and I would start talking with the people who made the food for me. And I just met such amazing, wonderful people. Like, for example, in Cambodia, I met a chef who lived through the Pol Pot Khmer Rouge genocide. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And he actually, like, the first dish that we ordered was a fried tarantula. And I wondered, like, what's the origins of this dish? And apparently he developed that recipe during the time when there was great starvation. There was just no food. And then I went on to learn that his restaurant is actually, teaching and cultivating the talent of young, marginalized kids who are helping bring about a new era of Cambodian cuisine. And one of the first recipes he teaches them is this tarantula recipe.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's stories like that, but there's also stories like I met Janice Wong for the first time, who is arguably one of the best pastry chefs in the world. She kind of defies some laws of pastry and physics with her foods. Like, she's making like these perfect spheres of cassis plums and these like volcanoes of like water and chocolate. It's just quite mesmerizing what she can do. And so, I had a bunch of footage by the time I was over in Southeast Asia for like 3 months. It was a bunch of like beautiful B-roll type footage. I didn't have any kind of footage to like make an actual documentary, but I had all these contacts. And that goes with the same with, me making contacts while I was backpacking around Europe during my study abroad period. And so I went back eventually to both Europe and Asia to film Taste in earnest later on.
Really cool, man. So you just kind of stumbled into it, so to speak.
Sure.
And then caught the bug and, just it's been go ever since.
Sure. I guess stumbled into it in the beginning out of kind of necessity because like I didn't have anything else to do.
Sure.
But now it's been like it's definitely not stumbling in. It's like grit and determination to kind of like keep it going.
Yeah, but that's how it goes. Is you happen into something that hooks you and it pulls you in, and then at some point, and it's hard to know where that turn is. And I think that's happened for everybody, especially people who are in creative professions. At some point, there's this turn where then it becomes this this thing that you just kind of have to keep pursuing. And the stumbling your way through it becomes grit and determination. And there is that crossover point, and it's kind of different for everybody. And I couldn't tell you where mine was, like where that transition was for me, but I totally understand that. So you're totally done filming, or you're still filming more for it?
I'm filming some like pickups, like if I need to fill in some gaps in the edit, but no, I'm not really filming too much unless there's like an amazing story that comes past me that's local. I will be going to New Zealand in a month, and I might be filming with some oyster farmers there in Waiheke Island, but that's tentative right now. So yeah, my main goal right now is to finish. I mean, I've filmed about 70 short films, and I think I've got plenty on my plate.
Sure, sure. And are you doing this all yourself? Are you traveling with a crew, or what does it look like from like a production end?
So on just a production or post production?
Just the production, like actually going out and getting the footage.
Yeah, it's mostly just me.
Cool.
So what I have is I have a couple cameras and I have a monopod. I
Yeah.
have like basically a shotgun mic. I have some lav mics, and I go to town. Sometimes I also bring a small tripod, but yeah, it's mostly that setup, and it's actually been a huge blessing to have that
Yeah.
because I'm able to get really intimate with my main characters, my participants. So like if I had a whole bunch of lights and big cameras and everything, people just tighten up and it just kills the vibe.
Yeah, yeah. It really reminds me of the first couple pieces I made. It was just me, and still to this day, like most of the stuff, I came up working in small crews anyway. Like if I'm ever on a set with 10 people, it's huge for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something really magical about it just being yourself or you and one other person, and especially in documentary, you're 100% spot on. It's like the more of a footprint you have, the more people tighten up, and it's harder to get the authenticity that you want. And it reminds me of like this short documentary, this personal piece that I made, where I was filming a buddy and his wife, who are have kind of a unique business. And at the beginning, his wife was not uncomfortable, but certainly not loose around the camera. And then by the end of the process, when I was doing pickups, she's just like, okay, give me the mic. I'll mic myself. And like, it was just like old hat by the end of it. And that would never have been a thing if it was, more than just me doing it. So it's really interesting how you can really quickly break down walls when you can, when there's not a lot of barrier, right? When it's just you and another person, it's super interesting.
You're right.
And yeah. And so, and you answer this however you want, and we can chop stuff out or whatever. But I'm so curious. Are you like, how are you sustaining yourself with this project? Is it like, is this the only thing you're doing and you're getting funding for it? Are you working other jobs? Like, I'm just curious, like from the more like real world aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got to eat, even though, no pun intended because we're talking about food, but everybody's got to eat. Everybody's got to pay their bills, and everybody has a different solution for that. So it's like, is this the whole thing? Like you're all encompassing, like this is your job for all intents and purposes, and it's sustaining you? Are you doing other stuff on the side? What does that look like for you?
Sure. So right now, this is my full-time thing.
Great.
It wasn't always. And bear in mind, like traveling in Southeast Asia or traveling in certain parts of the world is actually cheaper than living in America.
Totally.
I think my biggest asset is my frugality. Now, I am willing to spend on really high quality people, gear, and the like. Like we talked about before this interview, like I use the same microphone as you do. It's a pretty great microphone. I'm talking to you on a pretty high quality MacBook Pro. I have a pretty great camera and kit and everything like that. But I'm not living extravagantly. I eat a pretty basic, ironically, like when people look at just surface level, what I do, people must be thinking, oh, Kevin's like eating Michelin-starred meals all the time and like, exotic foods and Mai Tais on the beach. That's very far from the truth. I can be very Spartan in my existence. And I'm actually quite happy with it. And it actually, when I have less, I can be more creative. And I can focus on, like, when there's just an abundance of choices, abundance of decisions and things like that, you're just not able to focus and you can't get any shit done.
Yeah.
And so thankfully, like, I have a very set kind of like meal plan and everything like that. I mean, it's something that I enjoy, and it's very healthy. It's very conducive to being focused and everything like that. But yeah, I'm not going out eating at restaurants and things like that all the time. And also, there is a saying in business of you can have it cheap, fast, or good.
Oh, yeah.
And
you only get two.
Yeah, exactly. You know the drill.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a reason why I've been working on this for the last 10 years, right? So that also plays a huge factor. And the biggest financial risk that I've taken is actually moving to New York. And I guess we'll kind of talk about this later, but I came here to change the whole fast versus slow aspect.
Right.
So I've been able to make what I hope is good stuff, but very slowly and very frugally. And so before I moved here, I was traveling a bit. I also went back home, lived with my parents. I was paying rent, but it was very minimal, like not New York City rents, not even Bay Area rents. And then, I did a bunch of different jobs. Like I made commercials. I made commercials and documentary short films for AmeriCorps, which is basically like the domestic Peace Corps. I did this for 3 years with a culinary nonprofit that basically takes, marginalized young people and puts them in, some of the top kitchens across the Bay Area, and now also in Paris and New York, and teaches them, culinary skills and a culinary career path. And so I made documentaries for them, and that was part of my, just me sustaining myself. And then finally, I did culinary tours. In fact, I still do culinary tours here in New York City. I did one just last month. So, but that's very on occasion now. I'm going to stop you. What's a culinary tour? Well, you can kind of think of it as like taking a tour around a neighborhood, but I take you instead of like to, different historical landmarks. I mean, sometimes I take people to historical landmarks, but I'm taking people to chefs. I'm taking people to restaurants, and we're exploring a neighborhood, going really deep into the history and the culture of a neighborhood via their food. And back when I was in the Bay Area, my home base was Mission District for my culinary tours.
Sure, yeah.
So I would and that's, I'm biased, but I think that's one of the best culinary hotspots on the West Coast, period. And so, I would take people to ice cream shops and restaurants and pizzerias and taco shops. And it was wonderful.
That's really cool. That's a really interesting way, when it's warranted to hustle and make some ends meet and kind of still integrate your passions. I mean, that's really cool, especially because we're in this time when so many people want to spend on experience rather than material.
I have a lot to say about. I think that is actually partly the future of cinema, like our genre.
Oh, okay, interesting. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so I don't have a crystal ball or anything like that, but not a lot of people are coming to cinemas anymore. Sadly,
sure.
I do. I do quite often, actually, at least once per week. Mm-hmm. But I think people are looking for something more, and filmmakers are like musicians, and you're a musician as well. Like they've always been 5 years ahead of the technology curve before filmmakers.
Right.
When first it was cassettes that came out, then VHS. First it was CDs, then DVDs, then streaming music, then streaming video and movies, right? Mm-hmm. And the way that musicians make money these days is not through streaming. Hell no. It's through tours. It's through their experiences that they're giving to their super fans. And so I think that filmmakers in the future are going to have to take a page out of the musician's handbook and provide experiences for these people, for their audiences. And of course, films play a role in that. Like, they are filmmakers at the core, and they are kind of like the tent pole or the the lightning rod that can kind of like billow out into other experiences that end up helping possibly fund their filmmaking, whether that be making culinary tours, or I've had success with what we call film to table events, where we basically show a few taste films, and then afterwards I have a local chef or a couple local chefs provide a menu inspired by the films that we had just watched, and we have a meal together.
That's super smart. That's super smart.
And there's so many other ways. Like, it's really boundless. Like, you could have talks. You could bring in local bands. You can bring in somebody who helped make the soundtrack, and you share that experience with a musician, and you create a concert after a movie screening. There is really no limit. We're in this transition period, so people are just not used to it yet. But I think we have the power. Like, at the end of the day, people have no loyalty to these production the production companies, the studios, whatever. What people have loyalty to is the artists.
Sure.
And now more than ever, us artists, we can just make stuff on our own. So,
I mean, it's a world of access. It's how do you take advantage of it and make it work for you? I have a similar problem as a lot of other people. It's like thinking too inside the box and trying to force myself to think outside the box. And I really like a lot of what you're saying. The film to table thing in particular seems really, really smart to me. And like building experience off of, what you're doing as a business and as a creator with, making the documentary films and then trying to like leverage that into other things. It's super smart. And it actually makes me think of like, it's probably actually a good segue into like the subject of entrepreneurship. And I don't mean it in the traditional sense of like, sometimes when you say entrepreneurship, people think like, oh, startups in Silicon Valley and like blah, blah, blah. But I think what I mean more is just like the business side, like putting on your business hat, right? And thinking a little bit outside of that box where it's like, in a traditional sense, yeah, you're a filmmaker who loves food and has a passion for it. So you've married those two together and you're working on this documentary series. And then after that, it'll be something else and something else. And, but to drive the attention in a time in history when attention kind of rules everything, and it is almost like a currency, it makes me curious because I'm so fascinated by the different ways in which people can monetize or at least leverage what they're good at in different ways. Something that's been kind of coming across. Let me start again, just so I don't sound like a bumbling idiot. But like something that I've seen recently is the idea of, I'm paraphrasing because I may get it wrong, but the idea that everybody has $100,000 idea in between their ears. It's just how do you get it out and into the world? And it's really generalizing a lot, but the sentiment is, everybody's value is in what makes them uniquely them. So specific to you, I'm curious how you think of things less from the passion and the creative and more from the long-term sustainability, to enable you to keep making these things like taste and build like a lifestyle business for yourself almost. Like, how do you think about that, if you think about it at all? I mean, some people, maybe they don't. Maybe it's just second nature and they don't spend a lot of time thinking about these things. I'm kind of the super analytical mind where maybe to a fault, I pick things apart and then never get anything done because I'm thinking about it too much. But you get it. I'm just curious, like where you fall in the whole like business mind spectrum and like how you approach things as it pertains to, your career now and then looking into the future.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think you phrased it quite well.
Oh, thank you. Thank
No,
you.
like, seriously, like the and you have like how you phrased authenticity. That
Mm,
like you use that word authenticity. Um, with I mean, we are literally doing this interview remotely, right?
yeah.
Like uh most of people are consuming they're living their lives remotely. And the reason why I have stuck with doing taste for all these years is because I believe that nothing unites people more than food and stories. In fact, speaking of Silicon Valley and startups, like in a former life, at the beginning of my journey, I was actually in the Silicon Valley pitching this exact pitching taste to a whole panel of VCs. Like I fed fried worms to legendary venture capitalist Bill Draper, who was like one of the first big
Yeah.
VC guys around. He spit it out, but like, um, and I think people we're I'm optimistic. I don't know. Maybe we'll all go to shit. Maybe AI will enslave us all.
Who knows,
Who
really?
knows? Who knows? And I do have my pessimistic moments for sure, especially about, for example, like AI. But I think that people are starving for that authenticity, that human connection. And I forgot who actually said this, but there's a famous quote that goes more or less like the people out there who end up living their like living their true lives or living authentically are in a world that's telling you not to
Right.
are some of the most like uh, I forgot exactly what the right word was. Lack of a better word is like brave people or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that I'm especially brave, but I will say that I have tried to stay pretty true and authentic and building up like building up a business where you're kind of sending out the vibes of, okay, this is who I am. It's going to start attracting supporters and people who will want to also like will want to feel that authenticity and will jive with it and will want to kind of like also like it's helping them essentially is what I'm trying to say. Like that's the key to any business is solving a problem.
Of
And
course.
the biggest problem that humanity faces is knowing itself. I mean, that's what filmmaking is putting a mirror to the human condition and asking who is man, who is woman, like who are we, right? And so like I wouldn't say that I'm like an entrepreneur in like a very conventional sense. I think we've already kind of you've already kind of ruled that out anyway. Like I didn't get into who the fuck gets into documentary filmmaking for money?
Nobody. Nobody.
Nobody.
Absolutely nobody.
Nobody. Yeah, and I remember when Tim Draper said to me like, I like he said he he called me like Steve Jobs meets Dora the Explorer, which I thought was interesting. And I certainly I don't I don't know why he called me Steve Jobs. I'm definitely not a Steve Jobs. But I think it was just a funny little thing. But yeah, like he was like, no, I'm not investing in like film, TV stuff. He's looking for like highly scalable technology.
Sure, sure.
But yeah, but to make like a sustainable business, I feel like if you put out good work that is authentic, it will have, and that it helps people, and that's where serving meals and like the film to table events, or doing culinary tours, or even like I'm not reinventing the wheel here. let's not forget, like before there's Anthony Bourdain, there's Rick Steves, you know? I grew up on him, and like just puts his stuff out on PBS, but like most of his, and I've been on a few Rick Steves tours, like I think most of his income comes from like the books he sells and the experiences he sells, you know, doing tours around the world.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think I'm really glad that I've found a bit of a niche in a way. I doubt there are culinary tours showing, you know, or excuse me, just tours in general is showing like entrepreneurs. And when I say food entrepreneurs, I mean more than just chefs. Unfortunately, there's no catch-all phrase for like people who make food.
Yeah.
Not a very eloquent phrase, people who make food. I'm still, after 10 years, still trying to find like food creators, I guess, but I don't know. Creator doesn't, it doesn't.
There's not something that just like rolls off the tongue so smooth, you know?
Yeah. Like chef, I mean, that sounds, sounds French. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah. Oui.
Oui, monsieur. And so, like just thinking creatively and helping solve people's problems. And at the core of it, I think with this world of abundance where people are literally like getting their food delivered to them in a box, people are hungering for that authenticity and that connection.
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, hope to create.
You know, and it's like, it's also just, you know, sometimes it's just as easy as putting a mirror on yourself and saying, well, what is the thing that you're looking for? And if you're looking for that, then I'm sure there's any number of people looking for the same thing. I mean, it's kind of why I started this show in the first place, is because I wanted to have conversations with people I wanted to talk to, because like you said, I am curious, but also it's like, I'm trying to figure myself out. And the best way to figure yourself out is by talking to other people. And so a lot of times, if you're trying to figure things out, just hold up a mirror. And I think that gives you a good reflection, pun intended this time, on what an audience, for lack of a better term, might be looking for.
Yeah, actually, you hit a really good note there, Drew. Like when I did do my pitches to like VCs or angel investors back in the day in Silicon Valley, and also now when I'm doing pitches to like people who are funding films, the biggest question that they always ask is, why you?
Sure.
Right? And what was, well, for them, for the people in Silicon Valley, what was the problem that you had that you want to solve? Right? So you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
The second question is team, like the team that you have. But yeah, the biggest.
Sure. Yeah. Well. Speaking of team, you know, you're in New York now. I know we had a little bit of offline back and forth before this interview, and let's like roll it all into one question. It's like, what is next for you? Like, what are you pursuing? I mean, obviously, I know you're trying to button up Taste as a series, but what does life look like going forward post releasing Taste? And then I know you're trying to build out a little bit more in New York. So like, what are you looking to do as this kind of next stage of your evolution here?
Yeah. I'm building up a production company. And so, yes, I'm still editing the Taste short films that I filmed. And in fact, I'm looking for editors to help edit that. But I'm also building out the commercial side of Taste as well. And so my like primary, like number one hire that I'm looking for right now is a business development teammate to help build out the commercial end. So actually making commercials for clients and things like that. And that's another thing, like touching upon business, you know, one of the key tenets that you learn in business is diversification. Okay.
Sure.
And unfortunately, the business model of production companies these days is basically catering to 3 clients.
Yeah. It's kind of terrible.
Yeah. Disney, Netflix, and Warner Brothers. I mean, of course, there's like Paramount, there's Apple, but their slates are very small. And all of these companies, they've lost their, we've reached past peak subscribers, right?
Sure.
The bubble is gone. And on top of that, there's even like I hear on podcasts like this one service where they'll tell you all the things that you're subscribed to. Like you pay them to tell you what all the things you're subscribed to so that you can save money. If we're at that stage, then you know that like these streaming companies are not getting new subscribers.
Right. Yeah.
They're losing. And so we have to kind of diversify and think about all the different options and like creating commercial productions. Again, I'm not reinventing the wheel here or anything. I mean, even Martin Scorsese makes, commercials. But I'm here in New York. I've worked with big clients in the past. And so working on commercial productions to help fund our original short films, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, no, you're not reinventing the wheel, but that doesn't really matter because I'm trying to think of the best way for me to say this, but it's like, I think there's a lot about the traditional production company model that's broken and busted. And I think way too many people have all their eggs in one, maybe two baskets, and that's about it. So to your point, and it's like, and this is something that I've struggled with too, and I'm still in the process of figuring it out is, how do you diversify? How do you not have all those eggs in one basket and have multiple things that can feed into each other? And like, yeah, that's the dream, right? Is have the higher paying, higher budget client work, that you still do well and you're still passionate about, and because you have your own take on it, but have that help fund the passion work. I mean, that's the dream, and I certainly hope you get there. I mean, you certainly have the charisma and the confidence. I mean, you speak very confidently, and hell, man, you've been in Silicon Valley pitching people. I mean, it doesn't get much more like stressful than that. So I feel like you're in a position that a lot of things could open up for you. I think you're definitely in the right place. The pace in New York is its own thing, but if you want to build quickly, it's the place to do it. And hopefully people hear this, and we'll make it known that you're looking, you're shopping around.
Yeah.
So no, that's awesome. Anything else you wanna leave us with? Any final thoughts?
Well, I will say I am looking for cinematographer, a kick-ass cinematographer, nimble, but an eye for just the epic yet the intimate. Several editors and that business development first hire. That is like the key first hire is the business development teammate. And just to add on to what you just said, yeah, sure, it might have been stressful pitching to people in Silicon Valley, but they're just people too. And we've seen some of like the shittiest technology companies get funding. They don't know nobody knows what they're doing.
Everybody's to your point. Once you realize that nobody actually knows what they're doing and they're just kind of figuring out as they go, everything becomes a lot easier to just deal with. So I totally agree with that. Well, I'm going to throw all the links you sent me in the show notes for this. But if you have like a couple of key places where people can find you online, find out more about you, what you're doing with Taste, where can people go?
So I have our website, our official website's tastewithkevin.com. And then I post pretty much daily little short teasers and trailers and little behind the scenes videos on Instagram. That's my primary social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts. And yeah, I think, and also just the last little thing that I wanted to kind of say was, as a filmmaker or as just any kind of creative, just be insatiably curious. Like, I think that is the key to success. Like, because when you are curious, you're asking questions and you're learning about other people. And when you're learning about other people, you're helping other people. And that's the name of the game for business and for life.
I love it, man. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. So Kevin Longa, thanks for being here, man. It's basically, for anybody listening, Taste with Kevin everywhere. Just look it up and, I'll put links in the show notes, but you're an easy man to find.
Yes.
So, cool. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Drew. This has been a pleasure.
All right, folks, there you have it. That was my interview with Kevin Longa. I'll be sure to link to everything of his in the show notes for this episode. As always, a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this really helps us out. And check us out on YouTube. We're also over there, and we really appreciate it. If you want to learn more about this show, you can go to nosetpath.com or find us on Instagram at nosetpathpodcast. And you can learn more about me, your host, Drew English, at drewenglish.com or on Instagram at drewenglish with an extra H at the end. And if any of you guys party on LinkedIn, I'm also there too. Thank you so much for being here. I promise I will try to be more consistent with these episodes, but life is life. So until next time, take it easy.